in this new world, especially considering that a lot of my strategies for moving through these downs are gone. I can't go to the gym. I can't see my friends. I can't drive over to my best friend's house. I can't take my dog to the dog park. We have to adapt to the new culture, the new norm as it is right now, and still put our mental health as a priority. How to do that, Dr. Taslim will enlighten us today. If you're joining us live on Zoom, thank you for being here. You can put your questions in the Q&A box below. We do have a chat open. Bridget from MedCircle will be moderating that chat. So when Dr. Thuslam mentions any links or any resources, Bridget will throw them in there. But to get your questions answered, please use the Q&A portion. If you're watching us on YouTube, thanks for being a YouTube viewer. If you'd like to participate in these Q&A sessions in real time and ask your questions to our MedCircle certified educators, you can go to medcircle.com/live and register for events, or you can go to medcircle.com and sign up for our free email list. There you'll be notified of upcoming events, and we'll also send you weekly resources all for free. Real quick, MedCircle is not a treatment service. It does not aim to replace or replicate treatment in any way. MedCircle and MedCircle live sessions are for educational purposes only. I'm sure people will be coming in a little bit as we start here, but Dr. Thuslam, welcome. And would you mind starting with a brief introduction on who you are?
Sure. So thanks so much, Kyle. My name is Dr. Taslim Alani Verji. I am a clinical psychologist based in Toronto, Canada. I am the founder and director of a mental health clinic called SILM, Center for Mental Health. SILM means peace. And what we believe is that people are looking for peace, whether it's, from the turmoil that's going on inside of them, or from all the really crummy stuff that's going on in the outside world that affects us. And our emotional and mental health. And so we work on both of those things. I have my PhD in clinical psychology. I love what I do, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you today.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Thuslam has done a few series for MedCircle. One is out in the MedCircle library. If you would like to browse our full library or watch more from Dr. Thuslam, go to watch.medcircle.com. That's watch.medcircle.com. Dr. Thuslam, as people still come in and are submitting questions, I would like to ask you a question. What does life look like when we're feeling these symptoms of depression, we're feeling the symptoms of anxiety, and we don't address them? We push them aside. What happens?
The tricky thing about depression and anxiety, you can't really ignore them. And so they're going to creep up. They're going to affect your day to day. That's just the way it is. Unfortunately, when we don't then be proactive about it, we don't take steps to try to understand it, manage it, maybe resolve it, they usually get worse. They might start to get better after a while, naturally on their own, but usually they start to get worse. They kind of start to seep into every single part of our lives. We notice that our thoughts about ourselves, our thoughts about other people, about the way the world is supposed to work, all of that just gets so much harder to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes hard to kind of just do life.
Yes. And when we're in those places, and I'm assuming a lot of people are in that place today watching this live, or they know somebody who is, how can they improve that through things like education or interventions or even traditional therapy?
Yeah, so the more we learn about what's going on inside of us, the better it is. The hard thing about depression is that usually it changes the way we see things. And so it makes it so much harder to think back to a year ago when maybe we weren't feeling this way, and to see now as circumstantial, to see now as a distorted view of what we've usually known life to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's really hard for us to kind of go back to that. And with anxiety, it's the same thing, that idea of always being on edge, always being worried, fearful, kind of feeling that yucky feeling in your stomach that we feel sometimes when we're anxious. It's hard to imagine life without that. So when we don't have our usual interventions available to us, even understanding that the way our brains are playing tricks on us right now, the way that we're feeling right now is not usually how we've felt in the past. even that in itself, that education and that insight can make a world of a difference, because we can remember that there was something before this and it was different, and hopefully it was better. And then we can also pull in some strategies based on education. So whether that's, engaging in deep breathing, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later today, or going for walks, connecting with people in ways that feel meaningful, all of that stuff can make so much of a difference.
Yes. Excellent. Before we get to our first question from our live Zoom audience, if you're watching this on YouTube, welcome. Glad you're here. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We update that each week with new content. With more than 500,000 subscribers and millions of views, it has certainly been a resource, a free resource for many people. So take advantage of that by subscribing right now. Let's go to our first question, Dr. Taslim. SM asks, my grandmother is trying to be cautious nowadays, but somewhere her cautiousness is turning to anxiety, and also she is losing weight, not eating properly. Is she turning towards depression?
It's possible. So, I think one of the things that's important to remember for right now is that we're kind of all a little bit scared, and this is new for just about all of us. And so we're all coping in different ways, and it's pretty normal to be feeling symptoms of anxiety right now. And it's pretty normal for us to have some symptoms of depression right now, just because things are so different. Now, for your grandma, what I would say is, it depends on how anxious she is and how that's affecting her day to day. Is she doing the things that she usually would be doing? Is she connecting with you and the family and her friends in the same way? Is she as active as she usually would be? Now, if she's also, losing weight and not eating, those are usually signs of depression. It doesn't mean that she has depression, but that's definitely something to monitor, especially with old age, because we don't want someone's health to be deteriorating, especially given the circumstances right now. So I would say talk to her, see what's going on, see what's going on in her head, how she's feeling. And hopefully from today's webinar, we can also share some strategies on things you can try with your grandma, to help her manage her anxiety and depression if that is what she's going through, like most of us would be right now.
Well, and what would those things be? What should she do with her grandmother if she feels like this is where she's headed?
So it depends on if you can go see your grandma or not. So, sometimes we have access to long-term care facilities if that's where your grandma is, or you can go visit her and kind of your grandma's comfort level, your comfort level. But going and physically spending time can be really helpful. Playing board games or cards, having your grandma share stories about her past. For older adults, being able to remember nostalgic memories can actually be really, really helpful for depression. And so even if you can't physically go see her, playing some music from when she was younger, to help her remember some good memories, that can increase the positivity in her life, and that can make a really big difference. Having her listen to you about some of the things going on in your life and connecting with her so that she doesn't feel isolated in case that's something that she's feeling. Depending on your grandma's mobility, encouraging her to go for walks, or meeting up with other people if that's an option for her. Anything to kind of get her going. One of the things that happens when we're experiencing depression and anxiety is that we usually slow down. And so with depression, that it often includes less physical activity and less enjoyable activity. Yeah, it happens, right? And so the more we can do, that's usually the best intervention, is just starting to do stuff. And with anxiety, some of us, with all of the physiological symptoms, so our heart's racing and our tummies doing whatever our tummies are doing, we tend to kind of recuse ourselves, or, kind of turn inward. And that's our way of managing, while others, we become more active, but it's kind of like this frantic activity. So being able to manage that, control it, but still getting that nervous energy out, that can make a really big difference too.
I also love the idea of just calling, especially our friends and family who are older, and just asking them about their past. just saying, hey, I was just thinking the other day, I remember this story, but I can't remember this certain detail, because I've seen that when I ask my dad a few questions, then he gets going, and then he's back when he was in college and he's excited. And it's a clever way to get somebody, I think, into a happier mental state. I really like that. Thank you. If you have a question for Dr. Thuslam, put it in the Q&A box below. And thank you for being here on YouTube, watching live as well. If you would like to participate in future sessions, go to medcircle.com and become a free member today. Okay, did that sound like a commercial? And become a free member today, but do it, become a free member today. Okay, so let's go to our next question. Anonymous attendee says, I am stuck with my family. My university is online in another country. I hate being here. Been sitting alone in the same room since March. What can I do to feel better?
It's a crummy situation for all of us, being at home, sometimes with people that we might love but not like all the time, or maybe we just don't love or like them. It can be pretty hard. And so, making the most of the space that you're in is so important. So there are a few logistical things, right? So making sure that your space is comfortable ergonomically as well as emotionally. So whether that's, making sure your mattress is fresh, making sure your laundry is done and your room is clean. If you have a good setup with a desk and a chair, making sure those things are comfortable. That's kind of like bare minimum stuff, but maybe you can redecorate a little bit and try to make the space different so that even though it's the same physical space, it doesn't need to look the same all the time. You can rearrange furniture. So those are some of the things that you can try to do. The other thing is, when we're feeling stuck, it usually feels a lot worse than it actually is. Now, I don't know the circumstances and reality of the situation, but I imagine the people that you're living with aren't bad all of the time. I hope they're not. And so it might be around figuring out some boundaries so that you feel like you can have some flexibility and some freedom. It might be choosing to spend specific quality time with the people that you're with so that it's not like you're with them all of the time and the days kind of bleed into each other, but rather, like Wednesday night card games or Saturday night, everyone kind of pick a pot and a spoon and you have a bit of a music party. Whatever those things are, trying to infuse some creativity in it might make every day not feel like the same day.
Yeah, I'm going to give, I'm not a psychologist or a doctor. I have found, though, that because we are living in such isolation, I am turning to my phone and my computer more often to fill that gap of boredom or, depression. And then what happens is that I overuse that tool, and then I become kind of numb to it. I'm like, I've already seen all this. I've already gone on Instagram. I've already texted my friends. I've already done this. And so what I have then done is I have left all of my digital connections for a period of time, an hour, 4 hours, as long as I can. And then when I go back to them, they actually feel more rewarding, more valuable, more useful to me because I've been away from them for so long. I don't know if that's wrong or right, but that's something that I've done. Dr. Thuslam, do you want to shut that down?
I mean, I'll maybe elaborate and
Okay.
validate that. Yeah, I think that that's definitely the case for so many people. Is that we're kind of wavering between craving connection and craving so much of it, and because of the nature of the situation, we're getting that online, and we're using a lot of screens to get that filled, and then we get overwhelmed, we get numb, because especially depending on the type of connection that you're seeking out. I mean, if you're scrolling and not actually connecting, you're not really getting any meaning out of it, probably.
Right.
And research also tells us that those who use social media without really connecting with people, their symptoms of anxiety and depression actually get worse. And so, whether you're looking on Instagram and you're seeing people who look the way you would want to look or living a life that you would want to live, it kind of just makes you feel worse about yourself. And that's where a lot of that research comes from. And so, be strategic about how you're using your screen time, so that when you're connecting, you're actually connecting as opposed to filling a void with
Yes.
something that doesn't fill it.
Yes, I just did this. I went through my Instagram and deleted, I think, more than 100 accounts that I was following because I wanted to look like that. I wanted to go there. I wanted to have that. And I got rid of all of them. And now my Instagram experience feels so much more authentic and connective rather than, oh, I want this, I want this. I
Totally.
love this conversation.
Sorry, I was just
Um,
going to say, Kyle, really quickly. One of the tricky things about COVID is that, in any other circumstance, being aspirational and goal oriented might seem like a really great thing. But right now, with no clear indication of like when this ends and when normal comes back, like ideas of where we want to travel, that might not actually feel that great right now, because then the thoughts of but when and how and is it ever going to be safe again, all of that will start to creep up. And so we're also just under different conditions right now. So yes, go through your Instagram, get rid of the stuff that doesn't make you feel good, but also remember that right now the stuff that usually makes you feel good might not make you feel good right now.
That's so good. Dr. Theslam, I actually have a drafted blog post on this topic. Maybe I'll send it to you and you can add a little psychological backing to it and we can post it to MedCircle soon. Because this is good. This is really good. Um, MedCircle has a series on loneliness. It, before COVID, impacts millions and millions of people. I mean, truly, many call it an epidemic, a health epidemic of our country, of our world. And Bridget will put in the links in the group chat. If you guys have not watched this free series on loneliness, do it. Because even if it's not for you, it is for somebody else. It is for your friends and family. So we'll make those links available. Okay, let's go to our next question. JL asks, what is the correlation between migraine headaches and depression and anxiety? I've had migraine headaches for 25 years, and my neurologist just started me on escitalopram. I think I've been on that to see if this will help. Triotans do work for me.
Yeah. So, um, we often make this separation between mind and body as if they're two separate things. They're not. And so when your body is, or I guess when your mind is dealing with stress, which it naturally would be when we're feeling anxious and when we're feeling depressed, our body is going to respond in a lot of different ways. And so specifically when we think about migraines, I mean, I'm not about to tell you where your migraines come from because I don't know the answer to that. But what I can tell you is that stress likely contributes to it. And that's why one of the things we need to do when we have those migraines is actually shut everything down. And it's because we need to kind of withdraw again and let our bodies recuperate. Migraines are really, really hard to deal with. I definitely get them, and they're not enjoyable at all. And so being able to have some self-compassion is one of the best things that we can do. And instead of thinking about it as weakness, is to kind of just take care of it, right? Because it will just get worse if you don't take care of it. We can also do things to prevent it, like doing stress management, right? So whether that's practicing mindfulness and kind of slowing down, enjoying, or at least observing each moment, making sure that we're staying well hydrated, making sure that we're not getting too hot in this summer heat. All of those things can contribute to the prevention of migraines.
Excellent. MP asks, hi from Indonesia. Hi. During this pandemic, I have been getting disconnected with people with all the distancing. Even I got more anxious and depressed after online sessions with my therapist and online meetings with colleagues and friends. I hear you. How do I overcome this?
It's a tough one, and I think I would go back to the idea that when we're connecting with people, let's find meaningful ways to connect with them. There are some friends that I want to be connecting with every day, and there are some friends that I just can't anymore.
Yeah.
And screen time is really hard. And so, on the days where you have it in you to connect with new people or people you might not connect with as frequently, do it on those days. But I think, again, having some self-compassion and remembering that you don't need to bring your 100% every single day. And also what that 100% is going to look like is going to be different every day. And for most of us in these circumstances, our 100% is probably closer to a 70% pre-COVID. And so, you know, the isolation, it's real. And it's real for just about all of us right now. So find ways that feel okay. One of the things that I think can be helpful during this time is not forcing conversation. And so if you do have people that you usually would like to connect with, but you don't have a whole lot to say, play a game with them online, or just listen to some music with them. keep them on video while you're working, just so that you feel like there's someone there with you, someone you may have, gone to the library with, or a work colleague, or someone you would have gone to sit at a coffee shop with, and just see them, be with them without having to be on or connecting through language,
Great idea. Yeah.
because it can be exhausting.
Absolutely. I love that. I want to take a quick moment here to offer you guys a discount code. If you are not an all access MedCircle member, you can start with a free trial, and you can also get your first month at 25% off when you use the code Taslim25. Taslim is spelled, however, TASLIM 25, or TA Slim. I love that, TA Slim. TA Slim 25. And that'll get you 25% off. That'll also get you MedCircle. If you just do it for the first month, that's 5 weeks. So you will have guaranteed access to all of our live sessions, like the one you're watching right now, for the next 5 weeks, which we're doing 2 a week. So that would be a lot. Use Thuslam25 at checkout. Bridget will include the links in the chat. Let's go to our next question. An anonymous attendee asked, lately I've been feeling very down and can't get myself to do anything. I only watch TV shows and I'm overeating, which doesn't help. So I'm wondering how I could push myself to get moving and maybe create a routine.
I mean, it sounds easy, right?
Yeah,
But
just do it.
yeah,
Right.
just do it. But that's not the reality of the situation. So here are some steps that might work. As you're choosing the TV that you're watching, maybe find some stuff that makes you laugh a little bit more, some stuff that you're actively watching as opposed to passively watching. So many of us, especially with Netflix, that'll just go to the next episode right away. We stop watching and we kind of just zone out and let the TV run. So find a show that you connect with, find a show that is mentally engaging or emotionally engaging. While it's still sitting and watching TV, it makes a difference. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing is figure out why and when you're overeating. So usually there are some patterns that come up with that. So overeating can happen when we're trying to fill an emotional void, when we're bored, when we don't know what else to do. And we usually turn to salty or sugary foods, foods that are high in fat, because they make us feel good. They make us all feel good when we're eating it. And then later, maybe not so good. And so try to notice a pattern, but also try to think for yourself, like, is this actually going to make me feel better right now? And is this what my body needs right now? And when we can check in with ourselves around if this is what our body needs and if this is going to make us feel better, go for it. One
Yeah.
of the hardest things we do is shame ourselves for our decisions, and that actually just makes it all worse. And so give yourself permission to do what you need to do right now without the judgment, without the guilt, without the shame. At least then you can feel a little bit better about it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are
And
some,
and
oh, sorry, go
and
ahead.
it's that you mentioned earlier, that mindfulness component. Most of us, we don't mindfully eat. We just go in the kitchen, we grab what looks good, we shove it in our face. I do it all the time. But when we're mindful of going, why am I grabbing these chips? Why am I grabbing this ice cream? That's when you can start to make those tiny changes and see results. We also have a series from Dr. Judy on the Pomodoro technique. It's great for scheduling your days in COVID, especially if you're working from home. Bridget will drop a link to that free series. You guys can watch it there. Let's go
Cool.
to
I'm
our
just going to add to that question. So the other thing I would say is routines are great, but often what we start to do is really build in a solid, very full routine. And that's usually not the best way to start. And so what we say is start walking or crawling even before you start to run. And so what that might look like in real life is, if you haven't been showering or brushing your teeth, start doing that as much as you can. Even if it's once, like brushing your teeth once a day, if you haven't been brushing your teeth 3 times a week, that's better than 0 times a week. What we usually find is that the more we start to build in those small activities of daily living or those small self-care pieces, the easier it starts to rebuild. And so right now, if all you're doing is literally Netflixing and eating, add in some other things just to switch it up. Or every episode, just stand up and stretch and touch your toes. And even if you're not going to get up and stretch your toes, wiggle them in between each episode. Do small things. It doesn't matter what they are, but the more we can include, the better. As you start to feel more energy, which hopefully you will, then you can start to include, try not to aim for productive right now, just aim for fun. So whether it's, if you have an instrument that you sometimes play, pick it up. Even if you don't play anything on it, just pick it up or go look at it or touch it. If you have someone that you usually like to connect with on the phone, send them a message. You don't have to respond. Let them know that you don't intend on responding within a week, whatever it is, but just reach out, and start to include some of those things that usually bring you enjoyment. Even if you don't think they're going to bring you any enjoyment or fulfillment right now, what's the harm? Is that nothing will happen. And that's exactly what would have happened if you didn't do it at all. So just try, see what happens.
Excellent. Love that. AS asks, it is very difficult for me to ask for help from a friend or someone else, and it makes me feel inadequate. How can I work on dealing with the intense negative feelings which are triggered by asking for help?
Yeah, that's such a common thing. You know, we as as a society like to think that we're supposed to be able to handle everything on our own, and especially when we live in um, communities that are either individualistic, which means that we're supposed to rely on our own, or that are collectivistic, and that means that we're never supposed to bring anyone down because we're all supposed to bring our best to the table. There's really no room for weakness. But the reality of the situation is that none of us can live in isolation. We're meant to be communities, and we're meant to support each other and lift each other up. That's the whole reason we continue to survive and thrive in today's world. And so, needing something from someone, needing reliance, needing support, needing a helping hand or a funny joke, whatever it is, that's not weakness and that's not inadequacy. Unfortunately, though, our brains again play tricks on us. And so, when we do need to reach out, we might start to feel like we are a burden on people, or that we're bothering them, or that we should just be able to get it together on our own. None of that is true. And I imagine if a friend needed you, you would want them to reach out to you. You would want them to know that you would be there for them. And so, in the same way that you want your friends to know that you'll be there for them, know that your friends are there for you, that they want to be there for you, and that they can help. And so, being able to challenge that a little bit softly, gently, and strategically, because you also want to reach out to the people who are going to actually step up and be there for you, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things. The other thing that can happen with depression or just in life in regular is that we don't trust people enough to be there for us. And it can be scary to trust people to be there for us because that can lead to disappointment and heartbreak. And none of us want that. And so, one of the things that we can try to do is to reach out for small things. And when we can practice doing it with small things, we can learn who are the people who are actually going to be there for us and who are the people who might be less available to us or who don't actually invest in us the same way we invest in them. But if we don't test that stuff out, we never actually know who the people are who are going to have our backs when we need them to. And then when we actually need them to have our backs, we have no idea who those people are, how to reach out to them, how to ask for help. And it can feel so much more overwhelming.
Wow, that was good. That was good. I liked that a lot. JB asks, I read that more people are experiencing depression and anxiety during this pandemic. Is this depression and anxiety more situational or more likely to subside when we get a vaccine and can resume getting out more? Or is this depression and anxiety likely to remain and require treatment on a longer term basis?
It's a really good question. We, to some extent, have some answers and to some extent have no answers because we can't predict the future. I think it's dangerous to assume that depression and anxiety are ever just situational when they get to the point of being clinically significant or clinically like bad enough, or severe enough. And so when we're talking about depression and anxiety as mental illnesses, I think we want to stay away from calling it situational. Now, this situation definitely is bringing up symptoms of depression and anxiety for a lot of us. And I am so hopeful that that will kind of resolve itself as things get back to normal. But again, we don't really know what that normality is. We don't know how we're going to be able to connect with each other, and we don't know how long it's going to last. But when we're talking about the, the clinical, the mental illness versions of depression and anxiety, there are actually changes going on in our brain. Different types of neurological connections are happening, developing, and continuing to solidify themselves. And so when we get to that point, when those patterns are practiced enough, it's no longer situational. It can't be, because our brains are actually different now. And so it would be, I think, problematic and unfortunate to think that when all of this is normal, that we'll just snap out of it. We're probably actually going to have practiced this new way of thinking for so long that whenever this does get resolved, we're not going to be able to snap back, because it's no longer a snapping back. Things are actually different for us. And the way we understand ourselves and others and the world around us, it's different now. And it's probably going to be different if we're actually experiencing depression and anxiety as mental illnesses.
Yeah, great question. And thank you for that answer, Dr. Taslim. I love this next question. I have the same one. There are times where I am feeling extremely anxious, even though my mind and body are calm. If there are no ruminating thoughts present, nor physical manifestations of the anxiety, who do we then start to explain, or how do we then start to explain or deal with it?
So, how do we know if we're anxious without the thoughts and without the bodily reactions?
Good point.
I mean, I don't know if the person can answer that question, but, I think so for a lot of us, myself included, usually my body doesn't get anxious, but my thoughts are very anxious. And so because my thoughts are anxious, it usually doesn't come out until I'm sleeping. And so I have no awareness. So we might experience things like grinding our teeth, clenching our jaw, dreams that usually don't make sense and that are pretty anxiety provoking. We might wake up with a racing heart. And that's how our anxiety presents itself. But while we're awake, we really have no idea what's going on. And for others, we might have that cognitive or that thoughtful awareness of our anxiety because we're constantly worried or thinking or planning or organizing or challenging or questioning. And that's how our anxiety shows up for us. And then for others, we have no idea what's going on in our minds, but we know our bodies are anxious. And so it might be through an upset stomach or through our hearts racing or feeling on edge all the time without really mentally knowing why. And so when we're experiencing those things, it's so helpful to slow down and understand what exactly is going on for us, because all of those things are actually interconnected. It's just how aware are we of those connections inside of us? Because the more work we do to build insight, the more we can understand that the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, and the behaviors, they're all interconnected. We just need to do a bit of work to build the insight. The more we can understand what's driving it, the more we can start to address it.
Excellent. Our next question comes from a psychological counselor. And if you are a mental health provider on the front lines, a student or a teacher, military, we have discounts for almost everybody. So please email me. We have substantial discounts on monthly memberships. You can email me, kyle@medcircle.com. SJ asks, I'm a psychological counselor that recently was working in corrections. A year ago, I moved away from family and friends to a small town. Being an ESTJ personality with bubbly personality, my social life is cut. I'm sort of feeling depressed and anxious, but I've never felt this way before. Can the isolation be one of the contributing causes?
Absolutely. For some of us, that human connection is so important to our well-being. And when we can't get it, it's hard. If you're like me, I'm not only a bubbly social person, I'm also a huggy person. And touch is really important to me. And this is not a good time to be touching other people. And so it can be really, really hard, no matter what our personality style is, but definitely if you crave that social connection, if you crave seeing people, and that is what contributes to your well-being, the loneliness and the isolation can be so hard. It becomes especially important in those times to connect with people in meaningful ways, even if you can't do it in person. The other thing is be strategic about it, right? Because while right now, so much of the focus is on physical health and well-being, we also have to take a look at our mental health and well-being. And so it might be that socially distant in-person gatherings, while they might not feel the safest for our physical health, they might feel really good for our mental health. And we have to take care of both of those things. So we get to be strategic and we get to be creative, as long as we're, of course, following the laws of the state that we live in. But, try to get creative. And for someone who generally likes to connect with people, being invested in planning those creative connections can actually bring a lot of joy and satisfaction, because we feel like we're taking back the control and we feel like we're actually doing something that's good for us.
Yeah, I understand that. Excellent. An anonymous attendee asks, is depression a psychological or chemical condition? I've tried daily exercise, eating well, and phone conversations with friends. Getting restful sleep has been difficult because of the anxiety of an unknown employment future and the recent implosion of a relationship. I'm sorry. All of these contribute to my sense of hopelessness. Dr. Thuslam.
Yeah, I think, when we think about emotional or psychological versus biological or chemical, again, we're kind of fragmenting ourselves and assuming that these are separate things. It's also interconnected. Now, for some of us, depending on what is contributing to the depression, it might be that medication can be helpful because our brain chemistry has actually changed. But definitely when we see the pattern of depression over time, what's happening in our brain is changing. Now, whether behavior and changing the way we think is going to resolve that, or whether something in our brain chemistry through medication is going to resolve that, or a mix of both of them, we can't really know. But there's definitely evidence to suggest that both of those things, so whether it's medication because of a chemical imbalance or behavior and cognitive work, both of those are really, really effective in managing depression and often overcoming depression. And so I would encourage people to not think of them as separate, but rather interconnected, and doing the work on both of those things as much as we can.
Excellent. Anonymous attendee asks, how often should people use teas or supplements to deal with mental health issues? Is it okay to use chamomile, another type of tea, ashwagandha, as daily use, or are these just suppressing our problems and not dealing with them, Dr. Thuslam?
That's a great question. So, number one, I would preface my answer by saying I don't know a whole lot about the different ways in which teas or other herbal substances, medication and non-medication for the most part, work. What I would say, though, is that in order for us to be able to do the work we need to do, we need to be in a good state to do it. And so if your tea helps you calm down so that you can do the work, so you can think through, you can build the insight, you can start to practice your mindfulness, if the tea is going to help, as long as it's not harming you as well, go for it. We don't want to become reliant on things, but also so many of these things are actually beneficial to us, right? Like chamomile tea is actually good for us. And so, and it's probably not suppressing anything so much that it's going to have detrimental effects. So what I would say is, if it makes you feel good, as long as it's not numbing or distracting or taking away from the present moment, it's probably just fine. And it might actually be quite helpful so that you can get a little bit more capacity to then engage in the work that you need to do.
Well, if you're enjoying this conversation and like videos on psychology, MedCircle has a full library of them. If you go to watch.medcircle.com, you can browse free series and also view our entire library of educational content. And if you would like, you can start with a free trial. Just make sure you use Taslim 25 at checkout for 25% off your first month. We do not have the ability to create discount codes for annual memberships. It's through the system we're using. It's nothing we can control right now. So that is only good for monthly memberships, but TA Slim 25 at checkout for 25% off. Let's go to our next question. SJ asks, would self-hypnosis help with anxiety and isolation? If so, how could we learn how to do it?
Unfortunately, I know nothing about self-hypnosis, so this is not something that I can tell you about, but there are definitely professionals who know about those things. I'm just not one of them. So I don't want to give you false information.
No.
So I would say do some research, find out about professionals in your area. And if it works, I hope it works well.
And we have a series with a certified hypnotherapist, Grace Smith. She sits down with myself and Dr. Ramani to talk about how to use hypnosis to curb thoughts of self sabotage. Fascinating series. That's in the library I just mentioned, so check that out. MB asks, I've got CAD, heart disease, and COPD. It's very hot and humid here, and my self care evolves more around going outside and in nature. However, due to the weather, I'm inside and cannot go out because I have too much trouble breathing. I read a lot and watch TV, but you can only do that so much. Ideas?
Yeah, this is really hard, right? For so many of us, going outside and being, whether it's in nature or just going for walks, that's how we usually manage our well-being.
Mm-hmm.
What I would suggest, if it's possible, I don't know how hot it is where you are, but pick times that are less hot if you can. So, for example, going first thing in the morning, or when it's dark outside, that might make a little bit of a difference. Keeping a water bottle with you. I'm a fan of ice cream, so maybe even going for a little walk to get some ice cream to keep your body cool. Now, with the COPD, it might be really hard for your lungs to manage in any kind of heat. And so I would say, you have to kind of just feel it out for yourself of what makes the most sense. There may also be indoor walking options. So depending on where you are, it might be about going to a mall if it's open, or to an indoor park or to a conservatory. Botanical gardens usually are a little bit cooler. Or if you live in a building, walking around the building so that you still get to stay indoors might be helpful. Shaded areas are good. And so there may be some options, but you kind of have to figure out for yourself what is comfortable and what feels safe.
Absolutely. MJ asks, how do you help a client who has a love language of physical touch and who struggles with depression, but has a lack of friendships for support?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, even if this person did have friendships, it's not a great time to be getting the physical touch that this individual needs. So being able to work, I'm assuming this person is a health professional, but I don't know for sure. But being able to focus on what each of us needs. So for this patient or this client, what is it about the connections and friendship that makes it so hard, and working on some of that stuff. But then also being able to fill those voids around the physical touch. And so some things that I've been recommending to some of my clients include self-touch. So that might be like giving yourself a hug, or giving yourself a nice foot massage. Of course, it's not as good as someone else giving it to you, but it's something. Or getting a stuffed animal, a giant stuffed animal that you can kind of just cuddle with, a body pillow. Any of those things might help a little bit with the physical touch that so many of us are missing. Now, for this particular individual, it sounds like this was likely a problem pre-COVID if they've had difficulty with friendships, and kind of building those and maintaining those. And so I would say the more work that can be done in that department will hopefully be able to address some of the lack of physical touch that the person is getting later on.
And don't forget, you can hug your dog. I hug
Yep.
mine all the time. Anonymous attendee asks, I am against all the measures that are being taken because of COVID. I do not agree with it. I do not think they are in our best interests. The draconian measures are making me anxious. How can I deal with it?
Yep. I mean, whether we are on board with the measures being taken or not, this situation is bringing us anxiety because, for the most part, none of us like change, especially when it's not self-driven change, right? None of
Mm.
us, I would imagine, are would have openly been walking around with a mask and not physically connecting with the people we want to be physically connecting with. And so whether you're following through with the measures being taken or you're not, this is an anxiety provoking time. What I would say is acceptance is so important. It's not always fun. It's generally not easy, but accepting the reality of the situation, that COVID is here, that whatever measures our government is deciding to impose on us, they are what they are. We can choose to resist them if we're protesting or if we're just not following them. That's our choice. But the reality of the situation is that this is what has been recommended by public health experts. And so the more we can accept the reality of it, the less anxious we'll feel about it. Anxiety often comes from unknown or not understanding. And so there may also be some room there to try to understand. And if you're not going to follow the measures, which is your choice at the end of the day, there may still be some things that make sense for you to follow. And so being able to kind of understand where some of these measures come from and then think for yourself without taking an all or nothing stance, which one of these do I want to follow and which ones just don't make sense right now? Because that also helps us have a little bit more control over what's going on.
Yeah, excellent. An anonymous attendee asks, I've left my wife and she has refused access to my children. How do I cope with my sense of loneliness?
Um, of course, this could be extremely challenging when we're used to being around people, and now not only can we not be around those people, but it's someone else making the decisions for us. That can be extremely hard. I don't know what the kind of connection you're allowed to have with your children would be, but it might be um, distant or virtual connection, just so that you can feel connected to them. It might be playing virtual games with them, having conversations, video chats, if that's an option. If you're not allowed to see them at all, or connect with them at all with no contact, of course, this wouldn't be possible. But maybe, I don't know what the relationship is with your partner, your ex-partner, but trying to figure out what is okay and what is not okay, and then leveraging the what is okay so that you can make the most of it. The other thing when we're lonely, when we're feeling isolated, is that there's still a whole universe of people out there. They might not be people that we can see physically, but they are people we can still connect with. And so if we are feeling extremely isolated and lonely, there are still chat rooms that exist. There are still ways for us to share ourselves with people. So find groups of interest and join chat groups, or try some apps that allow you to connect with people in your area, so that you can start to build some relationships and maybe manage some of the isolation and loneliness. Of course, the circumstances are not ideal, but that might help a little bit. Or like Kyle suggested, maybe try a pet, and that might help with some of the isolation and loneliness as well.
Excellent. Next question comes from an anonymous attendee. I've been doing well over the summer, even though I've had reoccurring symptoms of anxiety and depression throughout my life. I've had ample time for myself, but next week I'm back to full-time studies and I'm afraid to get overwhelmed. My fear is I'll sacrifice my mental health by pursuing my dream education during these stressful times. Any tips?
Definitely. That idea of some parts of normal coming back, whether it's full-time work, full-time school, a heavy schedule, that can be really hard, and a very difficult transition. So the first thing I would want to say is remember that you've probably had a summer and then gone back to school before. So this is not new. It just feels new.
Right.
The anxiety and the depression might be new for you. And that can definitely make a difference, but you've done this before. So remember that. And I think focus on that. The other thing is sometimes it's helpful to start building towards it, right? So for example, you might want to use this week to start building in a routine from now. So whether it's waking up early or making sure you're going to bed at a certain time, trying to be pockets of productive throughout the day so that you're gradually transitioning to the full-time school again. And I think that will also be helpful. I would also suggest checking in with yourself once school starts. I know that's really easy to say, but perhaps ask yourself, am I okay? Am I managing okay? Do I need to slow down? Maybe this is a year where you take one fewer course, or maybe it's a year where you start getting some online counseling, or you integrate a new self-care strategy into your routine. Maybe you invest in learning how to study more efficiently so that you're not spending as much time focused on school. Whatever those things are, there's still so many options for you. Of course, that doesn't make it easier, but it doesn't need to make it harder either.
MedCircle also has a series on mental health in college for college students. I think it would be great for you to watch. It's available at watch.medcircle.com, and I'll have Bridget put a link in our chat. Anonymous attendee asks, my tween has anxiety and depression. My husband and I were close to divorcing, but on hold during quarantine. And then my husband has been just diagnosed with depression and anxiety, but is in denial and not helping himself. I'm trying to stay strong as I feel depression is slowly creeping in. There are days that are just so heavy for me. What can I do to keep myself from not falling into depression and anxiety myself?
Thank you for that question. I think one of the things that is great is that you have the insight to know that you're starting to fall into a bit of a trap or a cycle. The earlier we can recognize that, the better it is. Usually, the less intense it will get when we can start to take some action. So, what I would suggest is try to stick to a routine as best as possible, but make sure that self-care is a part of that routine. And so, I mean, being a parent uh, obviously takes up a lot of time. And I imagine you have other responsibilities other than being a parent. And so it can often be really hard to find time for self-care, to take care of yourself. But this is a really good time to put that into your routine. And the reason why is if you don't, you might see things start to get worse. And when they do get worse, you might not be able to carry out many of your responsibilities. So, what I would suggest is figure out what contributes to the heaviness. If there are specific, arguments that are happening with your partner, or specific situations with your daughter, or sorry, your tween, that are affecting how you're feeling. And it might be about creating some boundaries around that, or even after those situations happen, being able to take some time for yourself to kind of rebuild after those moments. That can be really helpful. Invest in things that you're passionate about. What I usually say to people is building mastery, as we call it, can be so helpful. So I describe building mastery as working towards something where you're constantly getting better and better and better at it. I call it like doing things that make you feel like a boss. And so whether that's trying new baking, learning a new song on an instrument, I love when I haven't heard a song in like 3 years and I still remember all the words to it when it comes on the radio. And so doing whatever it is that makes you feel like a boss, do those things a little bit more, because when all we're doing is the day-to-day grind and we're feeling so weighed down by our basic responsibilities, we stop remembering that we do things that make us feel like a boss. So integrate those actively into your day, and you'll remember that you still can do this.
Excellent. Nanam Satindi asks, how do you deal with a recent heartbreak that you're beating up yourself because you feel your emotional responses caused it and drove the person away? This person says they're suffering from PTSD, anxiety, and depression.
Yeah, relationship breakups can be extremely hard. One of the things to remember in any relationship is that there were two or more people in there. And so even though we may feel like we are the ones that made it happen, there was at least one other person who was playing a role in that. And so when we internalize and when we take full responsibility for everything that happened, we're actually forgetting that there was another person there to begin with. And that person did play a role in how things happened. It doesn't mean that we don't take responsibility for our part in it, but to take it all on is usually another brain trick that happens. And so as you're beating yourself up, maybe also take some time to check in with yourself around what did you do that was good? What did you do that was perhaps more assertive than you've been in the past, or that was standing up for yourself, or that was trying to have your own needs met in the relationship? Usually when we are unkind in relationships, or we feel like we are the ones who are damaging relationships, we're doing it not because we intend to, but because we didn't know how else to have our needs met. And so we're trying, sometimes desperately, to have those things met, and we end up hurting people along the way. And so being able to ask yourself, what did you do and what needs were you trying to have met? And how would you want to do it next time?
Mm-hmm.
It can often be helpful to write that stuff out, because it can be so complicated and it can take a bit of a process to figure out. But at the end of the day, that's what we're all trying to do in relationships, is have our needs met. So try focusing on that part of it so that you can learn and you can grow from it for next time, rather than being stuck in the blame and the shame, because that's not going to get you anywhere. Of course, again, important to take responsibility and have accountability for what we do, but that accountability only comes when we understand why we did it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that.
This next question comes from an anonymous attendee, and she says, "You've referred to doing work on ourselves a few times throughout the session. Can you expand on effective methods of working on ourselves? Meditation, inner child therapy?"
Totally. So we're all going to have different things that work for us, but some of the great ways that we can do it, mindfulness is one of them. So mindfulness has sometimes a bit of a bad reputation of being meditation.
Hmm.
And it might feel like that's just not going to work for us. Some of us may have tried meditation, just not good. But what mindfulness is not actually just sitting in silence with maybe some chant or something, but rather being totally connected with who we are and where we are at any given moment. And that allows us to experience fully and wholly everything around us. And so when we can start to do that, then we're not focused on the past, we're not focused on the future, we are focused on the present. Some of the ways that I encourage people to do this, when you're listening to music, just listen to the music, really observe the sounds, the voice, the lyrics. Try not to get stuck in the meaning of it, but rather just the experience of it. When we're cooking, how often are we paying attention to the aromas, the sounds, the colors? When we're showering, how often are we thinking about a million other things, or when we're driving, thinking about a million things? So instead of trying to do the kind of mindfulness that makes us sit in silence, I would say start with doing the kind of mindfulness that allows us to actually be active. That's usually an easier way to start a mindfulness practice. Why that's doing work on yourself is that it really allows you to recognize your thoughts and your feelings without getting stuck in them. Now, what I mean by getting stuck in them is usually when we have a thought, we attach some meaning to it, and then we start to think about why we had that thought and what's going to happen with that thought. But when we can just allow a thought to pass like a cloud floating through the sky, we don't get stuck, we don't get attached to it. And the same thing with our feelings. Sometimes our feelings can be so overwhelming that we feel like we have no control over them. But what mindfulness suggests to us is to actually experience that emotion like a wave that comes and it goes. We're not fighting for our lives trying to breathe in the wave. The wave is just there, and we get to observe it and experience it. So that's one way that we can do work on ourselves. The other ways that we can do work on ourselves often involve building insight and reflection. And that's more of that cognitive work. So understanding, why we have the thinking patterns that we have, why we have the behavioral patterns that we have, why we have the emotional reactions that we have. And that can often be facilitated through therapy, because then there's someone who's asking you very structured questions and guiding you through that process. But journaling can be helpful. Sometimes structured journaling can be really helpful. But whatever it is, it's really about slowing down and being connected to what's going on within you. That's how we do the work on ourselves. And then the next part of that work is obviously then trying to make some change. Now, we can experience that change when we build that insight. We understand where some of our patterns are coming from. And then we get to decide which of those patterns are helpful to us and which of those patterns are we ready to let go.
Excellent.
I would also just like to say, just because we know the pattern's happening and we know it's not helpful doesn't mean it's easy to change. For most of us, we've had these patterns for just about our entire lives. So don't think just because you know it now, the pattern is going to be different, or just because you're trying to change it, it's going to be different. It's going to take some work.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Dr. Thuslam, I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. I have gotten a lot of great comments, both in our Zoom discussion and over on YouTube. If you'd like to see more from Dr. Thuslam, go to medcircle.com and visit her doctor page. You can also go to watch.medcircle.com and browse our full video library, including video series featuring Dr. Thuslam. And finally, if you are not an All Access member and would like to start with a trial, make sure you check out for a monthly membership. You cannot work on an annual membership, just a monthly membership, and use the code THUSLAM25. That's TASLIM25. Dr. Thuslam, any parting words?
I just want to remind folks, this is a hard time. And so it's so natural to be experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression right now. And to be forgiving to yourself, to be self-compassionate, to be understanding, because there's no other way to get through this, but we will get through it.
We will. Dr. Thuslam will be live again with us, I believe, tomorrow, correct? On the 25th for our all access member only live event. If you would like to join us and you're an all access member, great. Just go to medcircle.com/live and register. If you're not an all access member, you can start with a free trial. Just make sure you register with the email address that you used for your free trial when you register for tomorrow's event. If all this was confusing, just send me an email. I'll get you. I got you. Kyle at medcircle.com. No worries. We'll get through it together. Remember, whatever you're going through, you got this. Dr. Thuslam, thank you so much. I'm going to stay on here and just answer any questions people may have about MedCircle. I know your time is valuable, so thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Thank you all for tuning in on Zoom. I don't think we are live on YouTube anymore, but thank you guys for being here on Zoom. And if you have any questions, you can just put them in the chat. You don't have to put them in the Q&A.